We got him. The Miami Hurricanes have hired their defensive coordinator. He comes from snowy Minnesota to sunny South Florida. Corey Hetherman. Welcome to the U.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Sunday. I'm Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and writer for Canes County at Rivals. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. We'll talk on this episode about front office shakeups, what Miami is doing to not only revamp the coaching staff after just having hired a DC, but that player personnel department. We'll talk player personnel because everybody arrived on campus yesterday. Move-in day for the transfers, for the new recruits, the class of 2025 signees. In fact, all of them except for one are early enrollees, and we'll tell you who. But most important news first, my friends. People were wondering, is this going to drag, closer to spring football? Mario sometimes takes a while to hire new assistant coaches, but this reportedly has gotten done as of Saturday, as we talked to you here on Sunday, that Corey Hetherman, defensive coordinator of the Minnesota Golden Gophers, is resigning that post in Minnesota to become the defensive coordinator at the University of Miami. And I have to applaud Mario, and I'm wearing my Super Mario hat today in honor of Super Mario Cristobal. I do think this is a good hire. We'll talk about it, but I applaud Mario because we mentioned it over the past couple days here on Locked On Canes. Loose lips sink ships. How quietly this DC search was being kept. I'm not going to say nobody mentioned Corey Hetherman because I think he did turn up on Gabby Urrutia's big board of defensive coordinator candidates. So I'm not going to say nobody brought up Hetherman as a possibility, but I saw his name brought up, including conversations I've had with people, seen his name brought up in very few places. So it just goes to show you that the loafers work in silence, whether that's in recruiting or that's hiring coaches. Mario Cristobal, he's like the CIA, not very much gets out of his coaching searches. So, all right, Corey Hetherman, just this past year, defensive coordinator of the Minnesota Golden Gophers. And this is not like a coach that, hey, Minnesota wasn't sold on him. He wasn't nudged out or anything. In fact, they just gave Hetherman a big raise and a 2-year contract extension a little over a month ago. December 7th, he just signed a new extension, and Miami was still able to poach him away. In fact, with him just having signed that extension, I was reading what the Minnesota folks, how they feel about this. And we'll talk about that because it's always a good sign when the people who cover and cheer for the other team don't want the guy to leave. That's always a good sign that you're getting a pretty darn good football coach. But they characterized it as Miami flipping Corey Hetherman, who just signed the extension in Minnesota. He now becomes Miami's defensive coordinator. The Gophers defense this past year, now prior to being at Minnesota, he was an assistant coach under Greg Schiano at Rutgers. There's obviously a connection there with Schiano, who has Miami ties and Mario Cristobal ties. But the Minnesota defense last year ranked 9th in scoring defense, that's points allowed, at just 16.9 points per game. We would certainly take that over the 7 games where Miami gave up more than 30 points and the 3 games where Miami gave up more than 40 points last year. 16.9 points allowed per game. They ranked 5th in total defense. That's yardage allowed in just 285.7 per game. Minnesota ranked 12th in rushing defense, giving up 109.6 yards per game. They were tied for 9th in passing defense at just 176.1 yards per game. They had 22 interceptions last season. That's tied for 7th nationally, and a +9 turnover margin, which was tied for 17th. And that's one of the big things that Hetherman, they do a lot of drills in practice, forcing turnovers. He emphasizes that a lot. takeaways is a big point of emphasis on his defense. And of course, that I'm sure was one of the selling points for why Mario Cristobal found Hetherman to be an attractive candidate. 28 sacks they produced this past season, not having, as much defensive line talent as Miami has. Of course, we all kind of thought Miami's defensive line underperformed based on the talent level this past year. So we're hoping Hetherman can bring Miami's D-line with all the talent that is on it, including Ruben Bain, who, missed some time this year fighting through injury, but had a down year this year. Can Corey Hetherman unlock Ruben Bain with his system? So again, we talk about these numbers. You compare it to Miami's defensive numbers, and the reason why the Hurricanes were looking for a new DC in the first place. Miami allowed 30.6 points per game this year, 363.4 yards per game. Oh, that's in the conference games. This was Kane Sport posted this. So that's not the overall season averages. That's just the ACC games. Miami did not play good defense against conference opponents, giving up 363 yards per game and 30.6 points per game. Here's something per the Minnesota Star Tribune. And I want to thank our guy Raymond Borg for sending me this article. It's always nice to see what the newspapers and other markets are saying. I mentioned back on December 7th, Hetherman received a contract extension through the 2026 season at Minnesota, which increased his annual base pay to $1.19 million. So that means the buyout, well, actually Miami didn't have to pay the entire buyout, but his total earnings for the next 2 years would have been about $2.4 million. Hetherman will owe a buyout of roughly $600,000, which Miami will presumably pay. And as they note in the Star Tribune, he's expected to receive a substantial increase in pay from the Hurricanes over his Minnesota compensation. Now, here's the interesting thing about the buyout. And I think we owe a thank you to Greg Schiano for a couple of different reasons. Now, Hetherman, like Mario Cristobal, comes from the Greg Schiano coaching tree. So my understanding is Schiano gave Mario Cristobal a great recommendation for Corey Hetherman, because, I'm sure that's one of the first calls that Cristobal made, because prior to being DC at Minnesota, Hetherman was linebackers coach at Rutgers for the previous 2 seasons, 2022 and 2023. Hetherman was on the staff at Rutgers that, beat Miami in the Pinstripe Bowl in 2023. So Mario got to see his work with the linebackers firsthand that year. So I'm sure did Schiano give Cristobal a recommendation like, hey, this guy's good. I can definitely endorse this guy. But there was a lot of talk that Greg Schiano wanted to hire Hetherman to be his defensive coordinator. That was something the Minnesota folks were talking about recently was, we got to make sure we lock this guy up, because if we don't lock him up, Schiano at Rutgers is going to come calling to bring him back. But here's the thing. I talked about Miami having to pay about a $600,000 buyout reportedly. So in Hetherman's contract, according to Minnesota sources, he would have, if he went to another Big Ten school, and Rutgers is in the Big Ten, the buyout would be 100% of the contract. So in order for him to go to Rutgers or any other spot in the Big Ten, they would have to pay the full $2.4 million buyout. But the language of his contract, if he gets bought out by anyone outside of the Big Ten, you only have to pay 20% or 25% of the buyout, which is roughly $600,000, which made it affordable. You go out, you get your defensive coordinator. A $600,000 buyout should not be an obstacle. Maybe a $2.4 million buyout, though, would be. So this worked out very well for the Miami Hurricanes. People are going to ask about Hetherman's scheme. So he ran last year a 4-2-5 defensive scheme, but he also has experience with 4-3 and 3-4 defenses. And this was kind of a cool note that David Lake at Inside the U wrote about Hetherman. He says, in trying to learn more about what Miami liked about Corey Hetherman, the feedback I got was he was an intriguing candidate because he ran a 4-down defense at Minnesota this year that communicated well, gets lined up correctly on a consistent basis, plays with physicality, and when watching the tape, it was clear that the players played really hard, noting that Hetherman checked a lot of the boxes that Mario Cristobal was looking for at defensive coordinator. Let's talk more about the Corey Hetherman hire, who he will hopefully find a way to bring with him, and also why, we can talk about what Hetherman accomplished at Minnesota, but do you view this as a risky hire? Because, again, a lot of the conversations that we've been having over the past couple of weeks since this job has been open is, will and should Cristobal be looking at people with, decades of defensive play calling experience, head coaching experience. Hetherman is not that. He is an up-and-comer. This could obviously work, but it could also be a gamble. You want to keep it locked right here, my friends. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. It's tax season, my friends, and this is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. Now, Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed, all while you go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now, this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantee. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Make your next listen Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack and I host that show. We take you around the ACC. We've been talking college football playoff. We'll be talking more basketball now this time of year. Locked On ACC is available free wherever you get your podcasts, and it's available free on YouTube. So this is a cool note on Hetherman from Tim Reynolds of the Associated Press, he's a stat guru. Tim, he's got his stat of the week and everything. This is a cool stat. So he notes at Minnesota this season, 2024, he took over a defense that ranked 69th nationally in points allowed per game the previous season. At Miami, he would be taking over a defense that ranks, 69th nationally in points allowed per game. So can he take that 69th rated defense into the top 10 in one season the way he did with the Minnesota Golden Gophers? So here's a lot of us are hoping that, and we don't know yet how the rest of the defensive coaching staff is going to be filled out. Obviously, there could very well be holdovers, right? Jason Taylor is still on the staff. Derek Nicholson, who we really like, is still on the staff, and I'm hoping he's going to remain on the staff because I know, in the case of Hetherman, it is interesting that his background, before becoming a defensive play caller, linebackers coach. So does that become a redundant area, or is he okay delegating that? In terms of defensive backs coaches, is Miami going to bring in someone who coaches both the cornerbacks and the safeties? Does he get a cornerbacks coach and a safeties coach? But here's hoping that someone, maybe Corey Hetherman, can bring with him to this Miami staff is his very highly regarded defensive backs coach at Minnesota, who's also he's got a co-DC tag, Nick Monroe, formerly at Syracuse, and we've talked about him before, years ago on Locked On Canes. Nick Monroe has been on the staff at Minnesota. This guy is not only known as a very good coach, but a relentless recruiter. And we found out yesterday, in addition to the Hetherman news, I know sometimes like the lesser headlines get swept under the rug a little bit, but it appears that Miami cornerbacks coach Chevis Jackson is going to be leaving to take another job. He's going to become the defensive backs coach at Wake Forest, which should not be surprising. Like, Chevis Jackson leaving the staff should not surprise anyone. He had worked with Lance Guidry at Guidry's previous stop at Marshall. He was handpicked by Lance Guidry last year. So with Guidry having been let go, not surprising that Chevis Jackson looked for another spot. So Miami so far this offseason, in addition to, of course, firing Lance Guidry and replacing him with Hetherman, Miami has also lost one of their defensive line coaches, Joe Salavea, who's headed back to his alma mater at Arizona. And now Miami is losing Chevis Jackson. So this is going to give Corey Hetherman an opportunity to choose some of his own assistant coaches, okay? And so I would love to know you guys' opinions in the comments below, because, again, Hetherman, it's always good to note he had tremendous statistical success and is well-regarded as an up-and-coming coach. He'll be 44 years old. He doesn't have a lot of defensive play calling experience, although he did do it at some smaller schools before he started doing it at Minnesota. So he does have defensive play calling experience. He doesn't have, a resume 16 miles long like maybe some of the other coaches that we've talked about. And we talked about maybe some former head coaches like a Pat Fitzgerald or a Mel Tucker or a Will Muschamp, with the thinking being, maybe Mario wanted someone established to kind of become the head coach of the defense. Instead, he goes up, and I'm not saying this isn't a good hire. I think it's a good hire with Corey Hetherman, but one of the boxes that he doesn't check off is being, someone in his 50s or 60s who has been doing this for decades and has head coaching experience. So do you guys view the hire as a gamble? Is it a gamble worth taking? Let me know in the comments below how you're feeling about the hire of Corey Hetherman. And, very good defensive numbers at Minnesota. And this is not somebody the Golden Gophers wanted to lose. In fact, they just a little over a month ago gave him a big raise and a contract extension, and they end up losing him anyway. And this seems to happen a lot to PJ Fleck's staff at Minnesota. One of the things when I was looking at the, Minnesota newspapers and their football message boards 24/7 and the like, I saw a lot of complaining from Minnesota fans, like their administration needs to step up and make football more of a priority and invest a little bit more. Sounds like a lot of the conversations we were having about Miami before a few years ago when Miami really started investing. So, Mario Cristobal has got his guy. And again, I really hope this works. This is someone who really emphasizes turnovers. His defense wreaked havoc last season with all the interceptions. And I'm hoping that, his defensive line philosophy is really going to mesh, assuming Jason Taylor is back this year. And I think he will be, because maybe there was some disconnect with Jason Taylor and Lance Guidry. Hopefully, he and Corey Hetherman will be completely aligned, and, we can start wreaking havoc in defensive backfields again because, Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor, who's going to be back next season, we want these guys and all the other talented pass rushers and defensive linemen that Miami has added. We want these guys finding success. And I know my guy, Bruce Warner, the truth teller, is like, don't stunt on every down anymore. Let's go straight upfield. Let's sack some quarterbacks. Let's get this done. Trying to think if we have anything else here on Corey Hetherman before we move on. So if you guys, we'll talk more about this, of course, throughout the week, and we'll see how the defensive staff gets rounded out because there are some vacancies. So also going on over the weekend was, you probably saw the pictures, and kudos to guys like Manny Navarro at The Athletic and Gabby Urrutia at Inside the U, who were paparazzi on Saturday. And I appreciate these guys. They were like hiding in the bushes, taking pictures of all the new Miami Hurricanes players arriving, move-in weekend coming up, which included, by the way, Carson Beck. Carson Beck has arrived at the University of Miami. He's already been TikToking with his girlfriend, Hannah Cavender. But also, I just want people to know Carson Beck is already putting in the work. Spent time with teammates yesterday, watching film, going over philosophies. Physically, of course, he's limited right now. You saw him wearing I don't know what you call that, a brace over his right throwing elbow because he is recovering from UCL surgery. And by the way, I'm not a doctor. I'm told I referred to the surgery he had as Tommy John. And then there was a doctor in my inbox who was like, that wasn't Tommy John. It was different. Here's why it's not the same thing. So, all right, but great. He had UCL surgery, hoping he makes a speedy recovery. Our understanding on Carson Beck is he's going to be ready at some point in the spring. He'll be able to throw again, but he's not going to be a full go in spring practice. He's not going to be a full go until the summer. But in the meantime, Beck needs to maximize his time learning the offense, learning his teammates, building chemistry, and it sounds like he's hit the ground running, and he is doing exactly that. So Carson Beck has arrived on campus, and, it's amazing how, and by the way, just to note, because we saw also photos of Luke Nickel, who's moving in, Malachi Toney, Zechariah Poiser, the new safety, all the transfers, David Blay, all the transfers are in. They've all arrived. The only player, this is not his fault, but the only player who is either recruited or transferring in who is not able to enroll in January is Bryce Fitzgerald, the defensive back out of Miami Columbus High School, because certain schools, usually private schools, will not allow players to graduate early and enroll early in college. So Bryce Fitzgerald is this is probably the highest early enrollee rate Miami has ever had, because everybody 20 plus high school recruits and the 8 plus transfers that they've already brought in are able to enroll early, except for Bryce Fitzgerald. So everybody else is on campus. And I think that's a really good sign for Miami. Is you want as many people. It's not only spring football, which starts in early March, but you've got all the workouts going on, off-season workouts, film sessions, getting to know each other, getting to know your teammates. So the ones who are able to enroll early, which is almost everybody this season, are at a big advantage. But let's go back to Carson Beck, because Carson Beck, he told Miami 24/7, he explained to them why he chose the Miami Hurricanes. Now, this is someone who, of course, has had a lot of success as the starting quarterback of the Georgia Bulldogs the past couple of years, a 24-3 record, over 7,400 passing yards the last 2 seasons, about 3,500 this past year. So here's Carson Beck on why he chose the U. He says, first and foremost, it's Miami. It's a wonderful place to be. You look at everything around, and it's a change of scenery. Getting to meet with Coach Cristobal and talking with him, and him being about his plan and his background and places he's been. I love the vision of what this team is, he said, and the leadership he shows. That's very attractive to me, Beck said. Of course, he was asked about how, Cam Ward a year ago in a similar situation. They're not the same quarterback. I'm not comparing them, but Cam Ward was in a similar situation last year. Was a draftable quarterback, as Carson Beck is a draftable quarterback, but Ward wanted to raise his draft stock, right? A year ago at this time, Cam Ward was getting probably day 3, 4th round type of grades, right? Ward came to Miami, lit it up for a season, set, Hurricanes franchise records, and was darn near close to ACC records in most every statistical category, was a Heisman finalist. And he has gone from that, 4th round-ish draft grade to possible number 1 overall, right? So that was something that Beck obviously saw. He says, there's already the blueprint, he said, about Cam Ward. It's the same situation, literally the same situation. They're the exact same thing, he said. He obviously just went through it, and watching his success and what he was able to do, he being Ward, what he was able to do before he came here and then after, obviously the position he's in now made it very attractive to me. He told Inside the U on Shannon Dawson's offense, which has some air raid principles. He says, you look at last year at what Cam was able to do. That's another thing that's very attractive. We're going to throw the ball around, and you got a lot of talent around you, great offensive line in front of you. I'm just getting here, learning the offense, but getting to see that made it very attractive for a place to be, Carson Beck said. And, he's right on with the protection. And Georgia's offensive line didn't do a great job protecting him last year. Miami projects out to have one of the best offensive lines in the ACC, if not in the country. So he's going to have his protection here. And, it's not going to be the same weapons that Cam Ward played with, obviously. But when you look at someone like C.J. Daniels, who also arrived over the weekend, and, Carson Beck and C.J., they were posing for photos yesterday. So they're getting to know each other. Miami's got Elijah Lofton, who looks like he's going to be a big-time weapon next year. And, yeah, folks, and obviously JoJo Trader is someone I expect to really catch on next season. And, yeah, there continues to be chatter. And I've heard some names, floated to me about receivers who could potentially hit that second transfer portal window in the spring and want to join Miami and join Carson Beck down here in South Florida. So I strongly believe Miami's going to add at least one more receiver, possibly a blue chip guy with and by the way, just so you know, I don't expect it to be Jeremiah Smith, unfortunately, but a blue chip guy, probably not Jeremiah Smith, could be joining Carson Beck and the Hurricanes come April. So I think we're going to continue to see talent acquisition because, the transfer portal right now is virtually closed with the exception of, teams that are involved in the college football playoff for the semifinal teams. And now the final 2 teams, Ohio State and Notre Dame, there is an extended window to enter the transfer portal. But for those who were not involved in the late stages of the CFP, there is going to be another transfer portal coming up in April. So we'll see what Miami can add. So I want to run down why. And again, we're coming off of, a good season at 10-3. You'll never call that a bad season, but disappointing because you didn't reach your goals, and disappointing to end the year off 3 losses in your final 4 games. So I want to talk about what Mario Cristobal is doing and has done already to attack the offseason and try to identify these weaknesses and turn these things into strength. Because I give Coach a lot of credit. You can say what you want to about, oh, here he fell short here, and this is the reputation he has. You could talk about all these things, but one thing you cannot criticize is Mario's love for the University of Miami and being willing to adapt, evolve, and sometimes compromise his own principles because he wants to win here so badly. Mario Cristobal wants nothing more than to turn that U into a national college football powerhouse and championship contender again. And I like the way Coach Cristobal has attacked this offseason so far. You want to keep it locked right here, my friends. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. I'm certainly not done yet with game time. Guys, this college football playoff has been so exciting. We're down to the final. You got two teams that we historically don't like very much, right? But it's going to be a great game. Notre Dame Fighting Irish taking on the Ohio State Buckeyes January 20th. And yes, you can find tickets and find the lowest possible prices on the Game Time app. This is the spot to go. You want to make memories with your family and friends. You want to go to the biggest games, whether it's in your area, our area in South Florida, or you want to hit up that CFP final. Check it out at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events and sports games even easier because it filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Guys, I've used Game Time Picks. We got some concert tickets coming up for this spring. I go to a lot of Florida Panthers games. We'll go to a lot of games in the area, and Game Time Picks, it's awesome because it filters out all of that fluff. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. I also love the all-in pricing feature. You can see the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. How about that? Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making this special Sunday episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I like the way Cristobal has attacked this offseason so far. And again, it really speaks to like the ways Cristobal has already evolved since he's gotten here. 2-3 years ago, you would never imagine Mario Cristobal would hire an air raid offensive coordinator. That's what he did, adapting to the modern game. Up until really, despite the fact that Cristobal had Justin Herbert, let's not talk about what he did in the NFL playoffs, but Herbert had huge success, was the 6th overall draft pick at Oregon. Despite having him, Mario Cristobal had this reputation as a quarterback killer. He's going to handcuff your quarterbacks can't succeed. Mario acquires Cam Ward and allows Cam, and I'm not saying Mario did it, Cam did it, but Mario Cristobal, there were none of those handcuffs that people would talk about. Cam Ward goes out and has the most prolific quarterbacking season in Miami Hurricanes history. That happened. He's not a quarterback killer, and Mario just landed Carson Beck. So obviously the quarterback killer thing has been debunked, right? The way he's able to adapt and the love that he shows for this university. Now, obviously we need to see the results on the field. 10-3 was good. It wasn't good enough. Right? We need to see Miami win the ACC. We need to see Miami get into that college football playoff. I get it. The job is not finished, but that's the point. The job is not finished, and Mario Cristobal, I appreciate and respect the fact that he is doing everything possible to attack this offseason to put Miami in position to hopefully be even better than they were last year. Now, I like Carson Beck. He's not Cam Ward, but this is a great option. And, if you're able to fortify that defense, Miami could be, if not better quarterbacked, Miami could be a better overall team. And again, I don't mean to disrespect Carson Beck because nobody should compare him to Cam Ward. I think Carson Beck could end up having a great final season at Miami, and hopefully he can raise his draft stock the way that Ward did. So the offseason transformation, it's not only happening, on the field with the talent acquisition, like Miami, they address their defensive weaknesses from last year, bringing in transfer cornerbacks like Charles Brantley, Emmanuel Carnley, Ethan O'Connor. They bring in Zechariah Poiser, defensive tackle David Blay. The Hurricanes, of course, have also brought in some offensive additions. You've got a new center, starting center, a new tight end. You've got C.J. Daniels, a new wide receiver. You got Carson Beck at quarterback, but also the way Miami is attacking that front office, the player personnel department, because, clearly there's been, I think a little bit of a disconnect with the talent evaluation and the scouting. Like, obviously, Cristobal is an elite recruiter, but you want to make sure you're recruiting and identifying the right players and the right talent. So Cristobal has also built up that front office, the player personnel department. You bring in Taylor Edwards to essentially become the GM and head up that scouting department. And you bring in Kiki Misipeka is the most recent hire, who's got a lot of player personnel experience. He's got all those Pacific Island connections coming from Hawaii. And you have Dennis Smith is still on staff, D-trained, but with a redefined role. So you're really building up and bolstering that player personnel department. And of course, you've now gotten your new defensive coordinator in Corey Hetherman. So, you say what you want to, and obviously you can. I know what people are going to say. Miami wins another offseason. Winning an offseason is important, and we can only hope that this time winning an offseason translates to even more winning on the football field this coming year. But I give Coach Cristobal, it's why I'm wearing the Super Mario hat today. I give Coach Cristobal a lot of credit for leaving no stone unturned and attacking the offseason, because a lot of people thought, hey, Miami's going to kind of come back with a younger, less experienced quarterback, and maybe we have to accept this might be more of a 6-6, 7-5 team, take our lumps for 1 year. No, Miami is going all in, bringing in Carson Beck, protecting him with that offensive line, surrounding him with hopefully even more weapons by the time we're done here to try and win something important next season. This is not going to be a bridge year or a rebuild year. Miami's going all in. All right, my friends, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe. We appreciate you making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Hope you guys have an awesome rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow on another episode of Locked On Canes. We're part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.